Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. Welcome to Slumpbuster with Juju and Dre, episode 9, recording here on Friday, September 27th, 2019. On today's episode, we discussed the emergence of two young starting quarterbacks, the NCAA's latest controversy, and whether LeVar Ball was right about Lamelo all along. Join us, bust the slump, but without further ado, welcome to the show.
With the sixth pick in the 2019 NFL Draft, the New York Giants select Daniel Jones, quarterback, Duke.
So you know, ESPN rated Daniel Jones as a zero-star recruit coming out of
Why would you do that? You're so stupid! Gentlemen, what are you doing? What are you doing?
He comes from an athletic family. His sister Beck.
You have Dwayne Haskins there. You have Josh Allen. Josh Allen's gonna be in a gold jacket.
His brother also.
No!
Jones takes the snap, back to throw, steps up, he's going to run. Jones to the 5, touchdown Giants! Daniel Jones on a 7-yard run on a 4th and 5 from the 7. And the Giants have tied it up with 1:16 to go.
Here we go. Pivot. 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 Pivot.
All right, guys. So, Dre and I have been thinking, and we have to talk about a very serious subject. One we never thought we'd have to talk about on this podcast. But we were wrong. We were mistaken. We made a bad call. And honestly, I don't know quite what to really make of it, but Danny Dimes is a thing. If he allows me to call him that, or if he prefers Mr. Jones, Daddy Dick Daniel, whatever he prefers. But Danny Dimes is here to take over the NFL. It's his world. He owns the Big Apple, as they say. And honestly, he owns the rest of the NFL. So, Aundre, your thoughts?
No, Daniel Jones, I think a lot of us were wrong, and I'm definitely not afraid to admit it. So I don't want to overblow it just yet, right? He's had a good preseason, and he had one very good game, right? Especially for starting. And everybody had said, oh, the NFL, when he actually plays, is going to be different. But he was legit in that game. So, Daniel Jones, I apologize. I thought that the Giants had taken you a little bit too high. And I still sort of think that they did, right? I don't think you're on very many people's radars, right? But I think the Giants might have themselves a very good future quarterback.
Well, Daniel, from the bottom of my heart, Andre's a filthy heathen, but I believe you are the one true savior. So,
I'm just not that convinced just yet. Okay, it was only one game, a very good game, right? And I said, I'm wrong. Daniel Jones looks like he can play in this league. You might be, the next coming of Eli Manning. You sort of look like him. I hope you get paid as much as he does, and I hope New York is as good to you as they were to Eli.
Daniel Jones, the one true savior. But seriously, you're right. It's one game. We all need to really take that into perspective whenever we talk about this. And it was one game against one of the worst defenses in the NFL in the Tampa Bay Bucks. It's not like he was facing the Bears. It's not like he was playing – I was going to say the Packers, but then we saw that defense on Thursday night. No, he played a bottom 5 team in the Tampa Bay Bucks. No one was playing defense in that game. And ultimately – he should have lost his debut. It just came down to a kicker missing 2 extra points and a field goal. But with that said, I'm impressed. Like, he looked like an NFL quarterback. I don't really care so much about the result. I didn't even care if he won that game. The point is, I needed to see the eye test. How does he look on the field playing against other NFL guys? And he was doing things that we never even seen Eli Manning do at any point in his career. So that's why, I actually think there is a little bit of weight to this situation. And I did pick the Giants in the upset pick last week. So it's not like I had my doubts going into that game. Remember, I did mention I thought that he was going to provide a little bit of a spark to that offense. They've had kind of a malaise the last few years with Eli Manning. So just being able to throw out something new, exciting, vibrant onto the field like a Daniel Jones, a rookie starting quarterback, was going to give that offense a bit of a lift, at least in his opening week. It's going to be important to see how he does in week 2, granted, he does play another bad defense in the Redskins. We'll talk about that in our picks. So it's going to be interesting to see how he follows up that. What do you think kind of like of Daniel Jones' long-term prospects in the NFL?
Yeah, I definitely think that he looked like an NFL quarterback, sort of like you were saying. And so if you look at his stat line, right, he had 336 yards passing, 2 touchdowns, 28 yards rushing, 2 touchdowns, right? And he ran for a touchdown with 1:16 left in the fourth. And so statistically, like, he looked good. He looks mobile. He knows when to get out of the pocket, right, and when to run. And he also knows when to pass, and he made some really good passes. The other thing is Saquon also got hurt, right? Which I thought when Saquon Barkley got hurt, that was sort of going to be like, oh, they're going to lose that spark. They're not going to be as good, right? I thought they actually still did all right. And if you compare Daniel Jones to some of the quarterbacks that we know that have been, at least somewhat successful in this league, like, their starts were definitely not as impressive as his. So if we take a look, I want to say, Joe Flacco, he was like 15-29, only threw 129 yards and 1 touchdown for his first start. Matt Ryan, who I've said is underrated as a quarterback and one of the really good quarterbacks that I don't think gets as much respect as he should, he was 9-13, 161 yards and only 1 touchdown. Matt Stafford, he was better than. And honestly, he even had almost as good, if not, better of a game than Cam Newton's first game. So Cam was 24 of 37, threw for more yards, 422, but he also had an interception, right? 2 touchdowns. So Daniel Jones is in really good company. Andrew Luck as well. He's comparable to Andrew Luck's first game. So
yeah, the thing about it is he is so much more dynamic than Eli Manning. Just at this point in his career, what he's able to do athletically is something that the Giants really haven't had the last decade. His ability to get outside the pocket, kind of this new wave of quarterbacks that have come into the league where these guys are actually athletes, can get outside the pocket and make some plays with their legs. We saw it. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. I haven't seen the exact statistic, but I don't think Eli Manning has had 2 rushing touchdowns in his career, much less in 1 game. So it's impressive to see him have that aspect to his repertoire, something that he could pull out of his back pocket. But it's going to be interesting. So when you look at it, too, the Giants, they have some weapons. He made Evan Ingram look like something. They get Golden Tate back in a couple weeks. Would it be out there to say this team could make a little bit of a run? Is that a little bit too bullish?
I mean, I'd have to look at their schedule. So I haven't looked at the Giants' schedule too in depth from this point on, right? I think maybe they make a slight run. I don't think they get anywhere close to being a playoff team just this year. Though I do think that they do have the chance to rack up some good wins, especially, like you said, that they'll get Golden Tate back. I think Barkley will be out for a little bit. He has a high ankle sprain, but, he'll come back hopefully in a few weeks, maybe 3 to 4. But I know ankle sprains can be difficult.
I think they've already rolled him about 6 to 8 weeks. So
has it been 6 to 8 weeks?
Yeah. So if with a 6 to 8 week timeline, you're going to veer more towards the 8. And even if he does come back in 8, we don't really know how well he's going to be. Yeah,
exactly. And so, but I mean, they'll get Golden Tate back. And so I'm excited for him. I think that they will do really well. I'd have to, again, take a look at their schedule just to see, but I wouldn't be surprised if they start racking up at least a few wins. I still don't see them as like playoff contention, but I do think that they'll be a lot more fun to watch now, especially for you New York fans.
I will say this. So I didn't really give much weight into the preseason because, well, it's preseason, and we've now seen so many teams start resting their starters. The only first team defense he really played in the preseason was the Cincinnati Bengals, who we don't really give much respect to anyway. So I didn't really understand how much of that was really going to carry over into actual game situations. It also added to kind of my idea of Daniel Jones, getting to see him carry that success over. That was pretty meaningful because when you hear reports out practice, you don't really know how much weight to give into those reports because it's not game day. Game day changes everything because there's so many players in the NFL that have a gripe that, if coach would just put me in the game, it could change my whole outlook to other teams. But because the practice field, it's hard to read. And only a select few people outside of beat writers, a few fans really have that kind of access to give that perspective. And when you have a guy who actually intends to hurt you on the other side of the field coming at you, that's like a different story than a teammate who's going to, well, you don't hit the quarterback in practice.
Mm-hmm. No, I think you're onto something with the whole practice is different, right? So all the reports that you'll typically get out of practice, it's usually what the team wants released anyways, right? So of course they're going to want the good things about Daniel Jones being released and none of the bad things. If there were, some bad things, which I'm sure there are, like he's not perfect, right? This is his rookie year, even though he looked great. But a lot of times what happens in the industry is in order to have access to the team, is the team tells you, hey, we want you to work with us on what you're going to put out there into the media. And if we don't like what you're going to put out there, we're going to tell you not to do it. And if you do it, we're going to relinquish your access to our team and our facilities and practices. And so I think you're right. Things in practice, right? You generally tend to hear, oh, so-and-so looks amazing in practice. So-and-so looks outstanding. The other thing is it's also a lot of agents, right, that are trying to get their guy the next big payday. So they'll say, oh, my guy looked fantastic. So you hear about these insiders saying that, so-and-so looks like the next, Peyton Manning coming out of practice, or so-and-so looks, like the next whatever receiver, right? The best receiver we've seen in a decade. But now I think there really is something realistic to Daniel Jones and how good he potentially could be.
I was waiting for him to look like a rookie. That was the big thing that I was waiting for in that game. Make a bad pick, make a terrible, costly interception in the end zone or something like that. But he never really had that moment that looked like he was going to falter in that game. In fact, the fact that the Giants were like 20 points down in this game and came back and he led a scoring drive in the final 2 minutes, that's what some of the better quarterbacks in the league are able to do. No matter how beat up they are during the game or down, you never really truly feel like the game is out of the realm of possibility to win. Mm-hmm. So if he provides that alone to the Giants, if they feel more mentally comfortable on the field and he can elevate his teammates, that's some immeasurable value right there. It's going to be interesting. So obviously, Gettleman took a lot of heat this offseason for drafting him as high as he did. How do you think that the perception of Gettleman in New York kind of changes?
I mean, so with the fans can be so fickle, right? Like one day they can hate you and the next they'll love you. I mean, I think if Daniel Jones, especially if he keeps performing at this level, right? I don't think he's going to. I don't think it's sustainable for him right now. Just with the team that New York has and how good they played against one of the worst teams in the NFL right now, I don't think it's sustainable. He is gonna have some lumps coming up. How big of lumps, I'm not sure, right? But if Daniel Jones can continue to perform and this team continues to do well, and they do go on a little bit of a run, Gettleman, he's 100% earned his respect, right? And that gives him maybe even more of a leash to go out and make some more risky picks. But now you can say, hey, if this dude was able to find Daniel Jones, who everybody else was sleeping on, right, then we need to give him a little bit more benefit of the doubt when he's making his picks. Now, the one thing I will say again is I don't know what the intel is like when it comes to the draft, right, and agents and scouting and all that stuff. And so if everybody else was right and Daniel Jones wasn't expected to go until the second or third round, I know that New York had another first-round pick, then maybe Gettleman, you could argue that, hey, Gettleman made the wrong choice in where he selected Daniel Jones. Like, yes, maybe he still selected Daniel Jones in the first, but just later on in the first rather than with as high a pick as he did. So that would be maybe my one knock against Gettleman if Daniel Jones does pan out, is you could say, hey, how good was your intel that Daniel Jones was going in the first? Because by all accounts, everybody was saying he wasn't going until the second or third.
If the other team picked a all-pro defensive end and you picked an all-pro quarterback, you won that first round. That's how the NFL is kind of measured.
But what if you could have had both? So what if
you could have had both? Okay, so you mentioned that. So when we look at kind of where the Giants were drafting at number 6, they had the option of getting Josh Allen, who's shown some flashes for the Jaguars, but isn't really looking like an all-pro. The difference between him and Dexter Lawrence right now is kind of very moderate. So it's hard to say at this point in each of their careers. In fact, Daniel Jones has so much more he could get better at. That's what kind of is interesting when we are talking about him, because the fact that he could look this good and this poised right now could be a telltale sign of how he can look in the future. Mm-hmm. With that said, it's going to come down to how Gettleman could build around him. And Gettleman probably is already ahead of the curve. Obviously, people were laughing at him too, even the previous year when he took Saquon Barkley instead of Sam Darnold. On the bright side, Daniel Jones isn't getting sicknesses meant for middle schoolers. He's already won that as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely give Gettleman respect right now, right? Like, we don't know 100% how this is going to pan out, but it looks like Daniel Jones is going to be fantastic. Several people have said Saquon looks like he could be better than, Ezekiel Elliott, right? Like, so Saquon's probably in the discussion for top 3. I know you have CMC, Zeke, and Saquon as, your big running backs right now, with a lot of people thinking Saquon might be the best next year and the year after. And so they're going to have a crazy good offense if Gettleman keeps this up. And like I said, I'm not knocking him too hard for where Daniel Jones was picked. I'm just saying that is a potential place where people might be able to poke at him and say, well, if you knew Daniel Jones wasn't going until the second or third, right? Or that some of these guys are not going as high, right? You might be able to wait and still get a better value. But that being said, looks like he's made the right pick so far, like you were saying.
Well, the thing that ran Gettleman out of town in Carolina was a lot of people said he was very ego-driven. Give him credit. He gave Carolina a championship-tier roster. That's what got him to the Super Bowl back in 2015. But a lot of people also blame him for why Steve Smith had such a bad exit with the team, why Josh Norman didn't stick around off of his all-pro years. Mm-hmm. Now that you have Daniel Jones having success, you have Saquon Barkley having success, you do kind of worry, is this going to build up Gettleman's ego to the point where he's making some of the other poor decisions with personnel that he was making in Carolina?
Yeah. And I mean, it's always difficult, right? Like, when it comes to really brilliant people, I would say 99% of the time they tend to have an ego about them, right? Or their personality is a little bit more standoffish. And I think it's just a trade-off that comes with some of the brilliance, right? Like, we've heard it about brilliant athletes, right? So Kobe Bryant, we've heard he was hard to work with, right? Him and Shaq didn't get along. We've heard LeBron James can be difficult. We've heard Aaron Rodgers can be difficult. And I think it's the same when you have these really brilliant GMs and owners, right? That they know how good they are, right? And so to them, everything that they're doing is right, even if obviously it's driving people out or it's putting people at bay or making them upset, right?
Well, yeah, with that trade-off, it's kind of interesting. So obviously I'm more on the pro management side of things when it comes to a lot of our debates so far. Would you rather have an ego-driven executive in a GM role or an ego-driven player? Probably you lean on more ego-driven players more than executives, because executives can change the entire dynamic of a team. Look at what Chip Kelly did when he had more GM privileges in Philadelphia. He ran himself out of town over there pretty quick. And in fact, coaches, anyone you give more power when they can run a whole 53-man roster, hasn't had the best results, unless your name's Bill Belichick, of course. Different story.
Yeah, but I think the thing with Bill Belichick, like, I'm sure the dude has an ego, but he's also very process-oriented and rules-oriented, right? So he makes decisions based off pure logic and, good reasoning, right? Whereas I think some of these guys that do have egos, they tend sometimes to do it. Most of the time they do it off of like logic as well, right? And reasoning, but sometimes they do it just because like, hey, I'm going to show you that I can pick a quarterback in the 5th round and have them be good, right? Or a little bit more emotion driven sometimes. And so I think that is where Bill Belichick sort of separates himself.
Yeah. I mean, steering the conversation back to Daniel Jones, though, what is considered a success or failure with Daniel Jones? Does he have to live up to Eli Manning's legacy in New York? Because New York's a very hard market. Let's face it, those fans, they want titles, they want wins, and if you're not producing them, they will be first to castigate you and run you out of town.
Yeah, I mean, I think already he's done a fantastic job. Like you said, a big part of it is just giving everybody hope that you're never out of any game, right? Like, I think as a Steelers fan, that's how I've always felt. This year has been kind of a down year, but there's always the hope of like, hey, every single year we have the chance to be in the playoffs, or we will be in the playoffs. And I think if Daniel Jones can bring that and maybe deliver like at least one Super Bowl ring, I think he's more than done his job, especially with all the crap he received coming out of college.
Do you think he can ever replace Eli Manning's legacy in New York?
I think that's a little bit difficult, especially because Eli Manning is known as being, right, like the Patriot Slayer. And he's the one that killed Tom Brady in 2 of the Super Bowls, right? And so I think it's a little bit difficult. But if Daniel Jones wins more rings than Eli, then yeah, definitely, right?
Well, let's say he wins 1 ring, but he has an over 500 record, which Eli Manning right now sitting even with his win-loss record. Does that make his legacy superior to Eli Manning's as a New York Giant?
So from a statistical standpoint, I think Daniel Jones can easily surpass Eli, right? Like you said, the wins, loss records, they're not that good. Even if you look at his quarterback stats, Eli is not that great of a quarterback. He just has this aura about him because he was able to beat the Patriots. He was able to deliver 2 rings, right? So I think just objectively, not being a New York fan, I would say, yeah, Daniel Jones can pass him. But I also don't understand the loyalty to Eli that the New York organization and the fans have. Like, I get it. He brought you some rings and he beat Tom Brady, but they seem to have like this weird connection with Eli Manning, and he was a good quarterback at one point, but they seem to love him out there for reasons that I can't explain.
This decision, like we both have said, it should have happened roughly 3 years ago, and we're seeing the Giants finally reap the results of being able to move off of Eli Manning.
Granted, we've given Daniel Jones a lot of praise, but to be honest, part of the reason why they chose Daniel Jones is because Daniel Jones went to the Manning camp of quarterback football. He has that tied to Eli Manning still. So to say like, hey, if they did 100% good process, they might not have even factored that in and could have gone with a different quarterback, right? But even their choice in Daniel Jones still shows that they had some sort of connection to Eli Manning, and that weighed in and that factored in, which it looks like it's going to reward them, right? And it may pay off, and Daniel Jones might be this fantastic quarterback. But still, like the fact that Eli's even, having an influence on your future quarterbacks is just a bit concerning to me and puzzling from like an owner and GM standpoint, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Daniel Jones wasn't the only quarterback that looked good in his first start of 2019. Kyle Allen came out of nowhere. He kept pounding, as they say in Charlotte, by drumming the Cardinals to the tune of a 38-20 win. In that game, he had 261 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, and Carolina looked like a whole different team. It's interesting. So Eris and I, obviously we went back and forth on this argument over like kind of like our Slumpbuster group me that we have. But I think it shows that maybe moving on from Cam isn't the craziest of ideas in the world. Do I think Kyle Allen's the right guy for the job? That debate's still to be kind of figured out over the next few weeks. But I think it's very telling that Monday the Panthers ruled Cam out. They didn't wait till middle of the week. They didn't wait till Friday. They ruled him out Monday. They did not hesitate. They did not skip a beat. They looked at their upcoming slate of games and they said, Cam, why don't you take a couple more games off? We think Kyle can handle this. And I think that's the Carolina Panthers basically signaling that they want to see what they have in Kyle Allen, because they can cut Cam for only a $2 million cap hit next year.
I mean, it could have been where they knew Cam for sure was hurt though, and that Cam himself could have told them like, hey, I'm not playing this week, right? And so maybe they made that decision. But I will say that like Kyle Allen, he looked good. Again, it was sort of, they didn't play that great of a team. And so I think it's always a little bit hard. And so, we sort of docked Daniel Jones for playing against Tampa. So we got to dock Kyle Allen for playing against the Cardinals. Though we've seen that the Cardinals can, at least be competitive, right? They tied with the Lions. And so I think Kyle Allen looked really good. Honestly, it might be time to move on from Cam. And Cam's hurt again, which we talked about sort of in our team previews, is that Cam Newton always is getting hurt. And was he fantastic coming in as a rookie? Yes, absolutely. Has he been fantastic, here in the league? Absolutely. But the injuries keep sort of hindering him. And they haven't really had that spark in the past few seasons. And sort of like we said with Daniel Jones, maybe this sort of reinvigorated the offense, right? Just to give them a little bit of hope and to give them something new. And sometimes that's what you need. And so maybe Kyle Allen, or at least starting another quarterback besides Cam, maybe that just gets the players to buy in a little bit more.
I mean, DJ Moore looked really good. Greg Olsen looked really good. CMC kind of was doing everything that CMC has been able to do over the last couple years. But this offense looked more together, more consistent. Every drive I watched or every highlight I watched of the Carolina offense, they were moving the ball consistently. They didn't have to stop because a ball overflowed at a wide receiver or a ball was chucked 5 yards to the left. I have been one of Cam's biggest defenders over the last few years. Ever since that MVP year, hey, maybe it's just because I had him in fantasy football in 2015. Ever since then, I've always been one of Cam's biggest fans. But I think we've kind of hit a bit of a crossroads with him and the Carolina Panthers. Mm-hmm. I've heard a very apt comparison made by Colin Cowherd in recent weeks, comparing him to Russell Westbrook. Now, Russell Westbrook, Cam Newton, both former league MVPs, both have led their teams to the finals. But Russell Westbrook right now can't get out of the first round. Cam, if he does get to the playoffs, can't get out of the first round. And most of the time, the Panthers are hovering between 500. Last year, they started off the season really well and then proceeded to lose 7 of their last 8 games. Started this season 0-2 before he got hurt. And since 2015, they only have a 24-26 record. At this point, do I believe that Cam Newton can elevate the players around him? I'm not really sold he can right now.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very adequate, comparison. Not only that, but I think sometimes there's media drama when it comes to both Russell Westbrook and Cam Newton, right? As we've seen where Cam Newton sort of laughed when the female reporter was, asking questions about football. He sort of laughed or said, you don't normally hear questions like that coming from a woman or something along those lines, right? There's been other things he's gotten heat for, right? And Russell Westbrook has also gotten heat in the media for trying to fight fans, which I think the fan was out of line in the way that he was talking to Russell Westbrook, without a doubt. But there's been other issues with Russell Westbrook in the media. And so I think both of those it's like they're very good athletes. Everybody knows they're extremely good athletes. But at the same time, like you said, they don't necessarily elevate their team to get the wins that you would expect. And you've sort of hit a ceiling. And at a certain point as well, like the drama that they're bringing with the media and all of that, maybe it's not worth the payoff. Whereas Kyle Allen doesn't bring you any drama, and it seems to elevate the rest of the team, and the team played really well and was hitting on all cylinders.
And if you're Cam Newton, you mentioned all the piling up of injuries. We saw Andrew Luck retire this year. Is he at that kind of crossroads where he needs to consider, does he want to continue playing in the NFL? Are the injuries, the rehab, all the surgeries really worth it anymore? He's made his money. He's probably made less money than the average NFL starting quarterback when you look at it now. If he wanted to, let's say Carolina does cut him, he's going to be signed as a starting quarterback. Where he signs, I don't know where, but some team would give him the contract, the money, the opportunity to be Cam Newton again. Mm-hmm. It's just going to be interesting, like how much longer could he sustain this pace? If he doesn't have another season where he's able to play 16 games, how long does it take for him to shake off that tag? And is Cam Newton hurt by his own reputation of being a former league MVP? Does kind of like that add to why we're so disappointed in Cam, why we think it's coming to an end, because we're not seeing him necessarily perform at that MVP level, even though he's performing at a fairly good to adequate level compared to most NFL starters?
I think it definitely can, right? When you have that high of expectations for people and they're not meeting those expectations, it definitely hurts your perception of them, right? Like you would start saying, oh, so-and-so is washed up. I think some people I've even heard are starting to have that conversation with Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers has not looked his typical self this year, right? Like he couldn't win his game in that Thursday night game just most recently against the Eagles. And it's not that Aaron Rodgers is necessarily like an awful quarterback right now. He's performing like decently and adequately. It's just that he's not the Aaron Rodgers that we're used to seeing. And I think it's the same thing with Cam Newton, right? Hey, he performed so well and was able to get his team to a Super Bowl. And now like he can't get past the first round. He doesn't look that great. Like the offense isn't moving around him like it, probably could be. So yeah, I think it definitely has an impact on the way that we would view him.
In terms of Kyle Allen, though, his contributions to the Panthers this season, can he legitimately win the job? So he's going to get one more start this week, we know. Probably even 2, just given that Cam is a little bit banged up right now. If he wins the next 2 games or if he splits, Do the Panthers continue to keep rolling him out? If his worst result is an adequate start where they lose, when do the Panthers decide it's time to move on?
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is difficult, right? Because if you go back to Cam Newton, I feel that you almost have to stick with Cam Newton throughout the rest of the season, in my opinion, because one, I think you're sending too many mixed messages, and two, it almost hurts Kyle Allen in some ways to have him start and then say, "Hey, we're bringing Cam Newton." Okay, never mind, we're bringing you back. At least in my opinion, right? And so I think if Kyle Allen, though, can continue to compete like this and Cam Newton maybe has some extensive timeout, right? It's beyond the 2-week mark, maybe even 3-4 weeks in. I think Kyle Allen could win the job if, they're having a winning record and the offense continues to look this good.
And some Kyle Allen backstory. So at one point, Kyle Allen was actually the #1 ranked quarterback in high school football. So he has like that pedigree built in him. He never really performed at the college level quite like people would have projected for someone with that kind of background. And that resulted in him being an undrafted quarterback. We don't hear too many undrafted quarterbacks, at least in today's NFL. That's part of the problem when you compare him to Cam, a former first-round pick. And when you also talk about potentially the Panthers' future, because he's got the start partially because the Panthers didn't really believe Will Grier was ready. And they drafted Will Grier pretty high. Remember when we talked about the Panthers in the preseason, we were mentioning his name. We weren't even mentioning Kyle Allen, even though he was ahead of him on the depth chart. So that's kind of like very telling where not getting drafted can really affect your long-term outlook in the league.
So what I really think is interesting is even though Daniel Jones went in the first round, right, he and Kyle Allen, I think, have sort of been slept on, right? In effect, or I guess in a sense that everybody was saying, oh, Daniel Jones, he's not going to be good. He's going to be garbage. And then Kyle Allen just didn't have any expectations. Nobody was expecting Kyle Allen to do anything. And so I think in some ways it helped relieve some of the pressure, whereas you get some of these guys that were taken in the first round, or even if it's beyond the first round, they still have a lot of pressure because everybody's saying, oh, they signed you to be the backup, right? Will Grier, they're signing you to take over after Cam Newton. Same thing, Mason Rudolph, you're supposed to be the one that takes over after Big Ben, which he is. And you get a lot of pressure on these guys and maybe they don't perform as well, whereas you have some guys that maybe are going undrafted or they, maybe do go in the draft and everybody's, talking down about them, everybody doubts them. And so they have nothing to lose, right? And maybe it helps them play better.
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be interesting to see where the drama is with both these quarterback situations moving forward. I enjoyed watching both these guys play really well in their first NFL start. I always tend to root for like new incoming starters and want to see what they can do. Unless they're a Cowboys starting quarterback, of course, but
Yeah.
But I think it's time we kind of like move on. We've talked about these subjects and they're developing stories, so we'll continue to bring what's going on with them as we go through. But speaking of news stories in the sports hemisphere this week, we talked about the NCAA to death when it came to the California legislation last week. But the NCAA is back in the headlines with a very kind of underreported story right now with the Kansas Jayhawks athletic program. So the NCAA handed out a couple of sanctions against the Jayhawks, charging them with failure of institutional control, which is a very serious violation in the NCAA. They've mentioned a couple bribery scandals with a couple of the Jayhawks' top players, and all relates back to this big contract they have with Adidas. So Adidas basically paid them a multi-million-dollar 14-year deal, and Bill Self kind of has a bit of a relation to them. And out of nowhere, players like Billy Preston managed to get $90,000, or I should say Billy Preston's mother, Dennis Smith Jr., who's a former Kansas Jayhawk himself. His handler wound up with $40,000. So there's something going on over there, and it's going to be interesting to see what the NCAA does with it. So the average case takes about 9 months to process. It's going to be interesting to see where they set that timeline. If they start investigating them a few months ago, did they say this 9-month process is already taking effect? A lot of the pundits that I've kind of heard talk about this subject so far have mentioned ultimately it's unlikely to affect Kansas this season. So obviously you're very pro pay the player. You mentioned that last week when we were talking about the NCAA. Is this kind of bringing out another hole in the NCAA when we talk about these underground scandals like this?
I think so. I think this just gives more ammo to the new California law and legislation in that, hey, if these players are going to be getting this type of money, right, like we might as well make it fair and equitable by having one overarching law where anybody can get paid, right, regardless of what school you're at, regardless of whether it's Adidas or Nike. And then it's at least a level playing field, right? Dennis Smith Jr., he was able to get that much money just because he was one of the best guys on Kansas, and nobody else is getting $40,000. Well, his parents or handler, whoever it was, is getting the $40,000, right? And so I think California is on the right track, and they can point to this that, hey, this is what you have going on, and it's more unfair now because you have only a few guys that get paid, whereas, hey, everybody can get paid. It levels the playing ground. So I am definitely pro paying the players. I don't agree with, the underground stuff that's going on, though. I do want to make that clear.
Yeah, so with that said, in terms of the Kansas basketball program or even just their athletic programs as a whole, the worry for a lot of their players, staff, etc. So Bill Self, who's one of the more highly regarded coaches in the league, he's at risk of being suspended if he's found guilty under these sanctions, which is interesting because I've kind of hear Bill Self might have an out. So he kind of has a relationship with Greg Popovich. Greg Popovich obviously coming towards the end of his rope. Bill Self's record at Kansas, so he's been there for quite a while now. He has 473 wins to only 106 losses. He's won 14 straight Big 12 titles, and he's a former champion. So he's accomplished pretty much everything he needs to do at the college level. Maybe it's time that he does do a Billy Donovan or a Brad Stevens and just eventually moves on to the NBA, especially because when you look at these sanctions in the past, look at what happened with Pete Carroll as soon as USC started getting hit with sanctions. Hey, USC, bye.
Mm-hmm.
I think the same kind of thing can happen with Bill Self. What do you think about Bill Self to the NBA?
I sort of like that move, especially I think it's hard when you're starting to have, NCAA sanctions and your name sort of gets tied to NCAA scandals. It's hard to move within the NCAA organization, right? Like it'd be very difficult for him just to pick up and, maybe go to a UCLA or to just go to whatever, another school is. I mean, if we look at Rick Pitino, right, with Louisville, they got caught in a bunch of scandals, and Pitino's no longer coaching at Louisville or in the NCAA in general. And so I think really like maybe his only option is to move up to the NBA, which for him, I think that's an upgrade. You're coaching at the pro level. I'm sure that the pros are different from the college level, so I think there might be a learning curve there. But if you have Greg Popovich, right, as one of your mentors,
yeah,
I think he would do just fine.
Yeah, and the thing about you mentioned too, like what more could he really have left at Kansas? Would he just need to move on from there if they are found guilty? That's true, because if they are found guilty, it's going to hit them in recruiting. No one's going to want to go to a school that can't go to the postseason, because at minimum, if they do get caught on this stuff, they're probably going to miss the following year's playoffs, which March Madness is one of the biggest cash cows in sports. When you miss those tournaments, believe me, it affects your school. It impacts kind of your legacy. And Kansas is regarded as one of the highly touted programs in college basketball. So it could affect them for quite a while. It'd be hard to move past that.
Yeah, and you never know what administrations are thinking, right? Is the school administration, they have sort of conflicting interests when it comes to both balancing out their athletics as well as their academics and their overall reputation. And so the school themselves, to protect their reputation as, a research institution and sort of their all-around reputation, they might say, hey, we have to move off Bill Self anyways, right? Just to show that we actually care about being a reputable organization as a whole. Mm-hmm. And I don't know all of the politics that come in with administration of college, but I'm sure that would also play a little bit of a role.
Other things that might happen to Kansas: they might have to vacate last year's Big 12 title. They probably have to vacate some of the wins that they benefited from some of the players receiving bribes. I don't really think that matters too much in today's day and age where everyone has access to a cell phone. We all saw the wins. Did we really care when Reggie Bush lost his Heisman? No, we knew he was the best player in college that year. Did we really care when Jim Boeheim got all those wins scratched off his record? No, because we know how great of a coach Boeheim has been over the last few decades. That's kind of a hollow thread anytime the NCAA does it. With all this recent NCAA drama, it's kind of interesting to see players kind of take alternate routes to avoid the whole mess. We mentioned his name kind of last week. Actually, I think it was you that mentioned Lamelo Ball in passing, but he decided to take Lamelo to an alternate route. Lithuania didn't really pay off, but apparently New Zealand is really doing Lamelo some good. He's been balling out in their league for the last couple of games. In fact, he went apparently toe-to-toe with one of the best defensive players that New Zealand has to offer. And a lot of people say he worked him. So now that's led to this development that Lamelo is apparently being considered as the number 1 draft pick in next year's NBA drafts, which did we think we'd be saying this after everything that Ball family has kind of put out there in the media over the last couple of years?
Yeah, so I definitely did not think that people would consider Lamelo that high anyways. So I figured that he still has talent, right? He's a very good shooter. Offensively, he's a fantastic player. But we've seen some of the holes in his game when he was playing in Lithuania and off the ball series. And then obviously, like, LeVar Ball is a distraction for a lot of people, right? He's running his mouth about organizations, their coaches. He thinks his kids are always the best, right? And so,
you know, I think most parents probably should.
You should, right? Like, you definitely should have your child's back, but you also shouldn't say that they're better than Steph Curry when, you know, they haven't played a single second in the NBA, right? So,
or have a broken shot like what's his name? I don't even remember.
Lonzo, where you pull it from the left side of your body, right, your left hip, and shoot over your right shoulder. Like, that's probably not the best form for a guard to have. And so, yeah, I thought with all of that, I thought it was too much of a distraction. I didn't think very many teams would be interested. So I'm pretty surprised by it.
Yeah, I mean, he looks the parts. It's crazy, like, to see, obviously, since they've been in the public eye for the last few years, to kind of like see how that guy's grown into a full grown ass man. Like, he's a monster. I was like looking at like some of the like pics they're sending out there in the media. I'll put it this way. I wouldn't want to run into Lamelo Ball in a dark alley. The guy is a beast. So you could tell that some of the trainers, especially since New Zealand, it's a pro league. So he's with pro trainers. He is with former NBA players out there. So they're teaching him the right ways to train for the pro game. We talked about it kind of when we were talking about USA basketball, but the international game has really been catching up to the US game in the last few years. Some of the way they've been developing some of their guys is years ahead of where our guys are getting trained nowadays in the league. We mentioned Dennis Smith Jr. is like one of the prominent players in the previous week's headline, but Dennis Smith Jr. didn't really come out of the college game looking anywhere near like Luka Doncic, certainly. So playing against other pros. So some of these guys coming around the world have really changed the game, and I think it's only going to continue at this rate.
Yeah, no, I thought that was an interesting point that you brought up, and I was actually thinking along the same lines, right? Especially because we saw USA basketball not even placed in the top 7 of the world. Do people start to give a little bit more weight to this overseas competition? And so maybe LeVar was onto something that, hey, maybe NCAA is not the end-all, be-all, right? Like, yes, that's sort of the best league for American NBA or NBA level type players, right? As they work their way up through the college system. And then you can take your best, you know, the pick of the best right there. But maybe these guys overseas are just as good. And so LeVar might be onto something by saying, hey, I'm going to take my kids, right, and possibly others, you know, people's kids, to go play overseas where they are still playing at that pro level. And we've seen that their pro level can just be just as good as, you know, Team USA's. Now, granted, we didn't have all our superstars, and I think it's a very different story if you have your Steph Currys, your Kevin Durant's, and Kyrie's and all that. Like, without a doubt, I don't think we lose if we have all of our top tier NBA players. But there's still something to say that Team USA didn't even place in the top 5, even with NBA level players. And so, yeah, I 100% think that Lamelo and LeVar did what they had to do, and I think it might be another future path for a lot of people. Yeah, and it's cool to go overseas.
Yeah, so, I mean, it's just, again, going back to Lamelo, though, being at the top of the draft, we know which teams are going to be at the top of the draft. Like, the NBA makes no bones about it. Like, we've seen the same teams at the top of the draft basically for the last 20 years. It's going to be interesting where Lamelo could potentially end up because we're probably going to be talking about the Knicks there. We're probably going to be talking about the Suns there, the Charlotte Hornets. The usual suspects are going to be at the top of the draft. We mentioned about the drama when it comes to LeVar. Do you think that could play a role in where he goes?
So here's what I'm going to say, and I've got my conspiracy theory, right? I think that some things in the NBA can be rigged. I think they're still a fun league to watch, right? I think they're one of the best entertainment leagues when it comes to sports, right? They have quite a bit of viewers. And so it's September 27th, right? I just want to go on record saying this. I think he's going to end up a New York Knick. And the reason being is LeVar and the Ball family have this big aura around them. When they were talking about, oh, Lonzo's going to the Lakers ended up in the perfect position to draft Lonzo, right? And everybody was saying, Markelle Fultz, right, was going to be number one unanimously. Markelle Fultz. And so Markelle Fultz goes above Lonzo. Lonzo falls, lands right where LeVar wanted him. And so the Ball family, I think they just belong in that big market. Lonzo, everybody sort of saw as a bust. And so now he's shipped away to New Orleans. And
is he a bust?
He does everything very well except for shoot, right? That's the one thing.
Which, is an NBA player.
Exactly. And in today's day and age, right, people want to see good shots, right? Like, so even though you have a lot of guys that are technically point guards, they don't play like point guards. But nobody wants to see your Jason Kidd type point guards anymore that can't shoot threes from, half court. So Lonzo's, shipped out of LA. The LA, thing, it generated quite a bit of revenue though. And it got the Ball family their own TV show. And so I think the NBA is going to make it to where the Knicks will be able to land LaMelo. The Knicks are going to draft LaMelo because it's going to bring a lot of people, a lot of viewers. You're going to have all your overseas viewers watching, the Chinese viewers, right? The guys from New Zealand that watch LaMelo. And then the Ball family is going to be able to continue their show. It's going to bring in a lot of revenue. So that's just my theory. I think the Knicks will get him.
I just have my mind thinking of all the jerseys that Knicks fans have bought prematurely, and I'm thinking about all the potential New York Knicks LaMelo Ball jerseys they're going to sell over the next few months, and then watch. They're not going to get.
You mean you didn't buy a Zion Williamson New York Knicks jersey?
I can't say I made that investment, albeit I think I could finally find some on clearance for about $5 nowadays.
Oh, I'm sure you could. Now something I will say, so you brought up an interesting point when we were talking about this offline and off air, is that we had talked about, does he really fit in the system? I don't think that it matters for New York. I think they just want to bring in the revenue. There's going to be lots of profits. People are going to tune in to watch LaMelo. And honestly, even though LeVar's a loudmouth and a lot of people hate him, you'll tune in because you either love the way that he acts, right, and you love his antics, or you hate him, so you want to see LaMelo fail, and you want to watch because you're like, hey, I'm gonna see LaMelo fail. I'm gonna tell you that I told you so.
Wait, you mean to tell me the New York Knicks are going to not make a decision based strictly on basketball acumen on the court?
It will. I know. I'm shocked. I'm just as shocked as you, Juju. But they will 100% choose it. I guarantee, just off revenue.
All right. Well, we're going to be talking about a couple of interesting headlines. So obviously, Aundre, you're known more as our UFC fighting guy, MMA, boxing, all that good stuff. I'm known more as the baseball guy in terms of our show. I'm going to let you kick off this next headline here. DC versus Stipe 3. Tell us about it.
Yeah, no, I figured this was going to be the fight. And I sort of even said it, right? Like, if I was Daniel Cormier, this would be my last fight. And the reason being, so a few things, right? But Stipe right now, he sort of had this retina injury, so an injury to his eye, which can always be sort of scary. Eye injuries are some like the worst injuries, especially even in MMA, just because you can get poked, right? And a fingernail can go in there, or even if it's not a fingernail, just a finger in general to the eye can be really damaging. And in fact, one of the guys, one of the coaches here, Mike Winklejohn, lost an eye because he got a toenail to the eye. And so I'm hoping, he, was blocking a kick. The person's, toe sort of flung around their hand and went into Winklejohn's eye, cut his cornea, and he didn't get to the hospital in time, and they weren't able to save his eye. So hopefully Stipe's okay. It sounds like he is. But he won't be back until 2020. And so that gives Daniel Cormier enough time to sort of rest and, relax, recover. anytime that you have a knockout, you want to probably take at least a year off, honestly. Most guys don't, just because they don't get paid enough to take that much time off, right? Like a lot of these MMA fighters are only making tens of thousands of dollars. Very few of them make the six figures, or millions of dollars. They're not all John Joneses and Conor McGregor's. And so Daniel Cormier, though, he's got enough money built up that he can probably take a year off, relax, recover, hopefully be 100% by the time Stipe returns in 2020. And then as far as the legacy fight, if Daniel Cormier wins this fight, he 100% goes down as the best heavyweight ever. Right now, it's arguable between him and Stipe just because they're 1-1 against each other. Daniel Cormier's only ever lost one fight at heavyweight, and that was obviously to Stipe. Stipe also has only really ever lost to Daniel Cormier. And so comparably, they've got very comparable records against each other. Daniel Cormier is also basically undefeated at light heavyweight outside of one person, and that's John Jones, who you could argue, hey, John Jones was doing steroids, right? He's doing a lot of things that he shouldn't have been. He got popped twice, and he got popped for cocaine. And so for some people, that knocks John Jones down or disqualifies him from the run-in. And so if DC wins this fight, cements his legacy, he's good. If he loses, he could say, hey, I tried my best. Stipe is the best ever heavyweight. I'm the second best ever heavyweight. And I get to go out, I've got plenty of money and I'm good.
Yeah. Well, I look forward to that fight, but what I'm really looking forward to is going to be the MLB postseason. So that takes place on Tuesday. And one of the teams that won't be around to participate is the team that we were told would be world beaters this year. They added JT Realmuto. They added Andrew McCutchen. And, of course, they added Bryce Harper for a whopping 13 years, $330 million. Yes, I'm talking about the Philadelphia Phillies. So the Phillies were eliminated by Bryce Harper's former employer, the Washington Nationals, this week. And, hey, bright side, you only have to pay him for another 12 years, Philly. So good job there. The downside, 10-year contracts in baseball tend to not be like fine wine. They tend to not really age well. Some of the other notable 10-year deals around the sport in the last couple decades have been like Al Rodriguez. He technically got paid twice. Giancarlo Stanton, Albert Pujols, and now Bryce Harper. Only A-Rod out of that group can say he won a title. And this one came out in New York, which, hey, they're used to it. The other teams, on the other hand, they consistently miss the playoffs. And I think it just goes to show that the market will always work out for these players when it comes to these deals, because there's always going to be bad teams that are willing to offer them. No matter how many analytic guys tell you that, no, it's a terrible decision, there's always going to be some poor franchise that will still pay these guys because they don't know any better. And, hey, there's always going to be bad teams in sports. Another missing piece in this year's postseason, and this one's near and dear to my heart, obviously, as a San Francisco Giants fan, but Bruce Bochy won't be participating. In fact, unfortunately, Bruce Bochy, after this weekend, will no longer be the coach of the San Francisco Giants. He's moving on to retirement. The one bright side I'll say about this season is, hey, at least, Bruce, they were able to get you your 2000th win. You're only the 11th manager in MLB history to accomplish that feat. I wish Bruce nothing but the best in retirement, but I tell you, it's going to be weird to look into that dugout and not see him, walking around. One of my favorite memories as a kid is I actually do have Bruce Bochy's signature on a ball. Kind of a weird novelty, but I have him signed on a Seattle Mariners ball, so I always look back fondly at that. Bruce Bochy, Hall of Fame, 5 years from now. Let's see, so 2024.
So I don't know the economics of baseball as much as you probably do, and I know that they don't have quite the cap that some of the other sports have. So do you think it would ever be the case where we might see some of these star baseball players take a pay cut to maybe allow their team to get really good players and surround them with good players?
No, I mean, not as long as it's guaranteed money, which as much flack as the NFL gets for not having guaranteed money, it gives the players more motivation to continue to perform at a high level. Oftentimes after players get paid in the MLB, they start to decline, and they decline drastically because the MLB has a bad reputation for paying players on what they've done, not what they're going to do. So when you see these 10-year deals given, they're usually given after a player's already performed in their prime, which would be disappointing for a player like Bryce Harper because he did get this deal in his 20s. It's not like he was already 34 and got a 10-year deal like like we've seen kind of with Alex Rodriguez. I mentioned his name. But yeah, economically with baseball, when you do have like a sport with guaranteed contracts and money, it does definitely lessen the flexibility of these rosters to move players around or move off of bad contracts. And ultimately, player motivation too doesn't really stick at a high level. I think honestly, if baseball was more like the NFL, baseball's popularity might actually be at a higher level than it is right now, because you see too many of these terrible contracts kind of like slow teams down for years.
Yeah, no, I was going to say the exact same thing. Is you get a lot of these guys, or even if it's not necessarily the guy has gone over the hill and they're no longer performing at the level they have been, they just can't do it all by themselves, right? And so with baseball, because there's so many other moving pieces, that you can have a really high paid player that can still be very good. It's just not ever going to be enough to get your team to, to the postseason.
I mean, we mentioned it. Bad franchises have a reputation for remaining bad. It's just the way things are. Mm-hmm. I mean, the Angels, they paid Mike Trout, and you could argue that contract's working out just fine right now. But hey, the Angels are also going to miss the playoffs.
Yeah, and I don't know if they'll ever get back to the playoffs. And so do you really want to – I mean, it's nice to cheer for Mike Trout, right? Like I've heard a lot of people regard him as the best baseball player. And again, like I'm not a baseball expert, but I always think it's fun to cheer for Mike Trout and the Angels. Yeah, I like a lot of the LA teams, but I'm not ever expecting the Angels to make the playoffs, right? And it sucks when that's your team, that's the team you root for, and they're never going to make it to the postseason.
Yeah, and then, hey, they also handed out a terrible deal to Albert Pujols. They're probably the benchmark for these bad contracts now. Well,
yep.
Yeah. With that said, hey, I look forward to the MLB postseason. Like I said, starts Tuesday. We're going to probably go more in depth on it next week. And actually, too, we're going to be starting a new series here starting up in October. You've seen YouTube reviewers. You've seen people to talk about sports movies. Well, we're going to bring that together. So starting up in October, specifically for our baseball fans, we're going to be talking about 4 of our favorite Major League Baseball movies. So stay tuned for that. We're going to be posting the reviews on our YouTube channel, and we hope you enjoy when we get into that. But moving off of that, I think it's time that we kind of look into our Week 4 NFL predictions. So, Aundre, how's it feeling, man? 2 weeks in a row. I've gone the edge on you, man. I'm nailing these dog picks right now. I didn't mention it earlier, but Daniel Jones over Tampa in the upset, got that one. Kyle Allen against Arizona on the road, got that one. And then I also picked the Redskins against Bears. I didn't do so well on that one, but
no, you're doing so. I will let everybody know that in general, I tend to go with like statistics and like computer models, right? And I'm like, oh, these would obviously be, a good choice, right? Like the Packers at home that have been performing extremely well, and the Eagles that have been struggling. It was like, it just makes sense statistically, right, that the Packers would win that game. And no. So, Julian, you have been killing it on these dog picks. I don't know how, but that being said, just wait. We've still got plenty of weeks left.
Well, we're 4 Thursday night games in the books, and all 4 times the underdog has took the win. So this is I should say I was 0-3 in Thursday night games, as were you. Well, 0-4 now, but
yes.
So I was 0-3 in Thursday night games before this game. I decided to go with the Eagles just because I thought to myself, I saw this team going 13-3. Do I really see them starting the season 1-3? That was kind of like my gut feeling when I looked at this game ultimately. And the Packers, they've been playing really well, but they weren't really beating teams up. So I just kind of went with my gut on that one and chose the Eagles. With that said, it was probably one of the most entertaining Thursday night games we've ever had the luxury of really seeing since Thursday night football has really taken off.
Oh, yeah.
I kind of like talk about your thoughts on this game.
No, it was good. I mean, you had good offense. You had pretty decent defense, right? It even started off, unfortunately, I forget who it was that got hurt, right? But you could tell that that both teams were playing with passion. Like, there were some hard hits early on. I hope whoever it is, they had like a neck and a head injury.
It was Jamal Williams. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm hoping that he's okay. It did look pretty nasty. But I thought it was an extremely exciting game. And then Aaron Rodgers, though, like you can start to see that he's making mistakes towards the end of the game.
Yeah, So Matt LaFleur has gained the Pete Carroll comparisons these days for his decision to throw the ball 4 times on the 1-yard line.
Yeah.
So like I don't think that decision is necessarily going to help Aaron Rodgers in his relationship moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
But also, too, how do you think Aaron Rodgers feels about that, given you would think as a star quarterback, he would love the opportunity to hit the team on his back and win the game on the 1-yard line, and instead he comes up short.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. Like, we talked about this a little bit earlier when we talked about Cam Newton, right? Is that there's some guys that are not performing to the level that they used to be able to perform at. And so now people are really disappointed in them. And I think that's starting to happen with Aaron Rodgers. You would figure in that situation, because we've seen him throw Hail Mary passes into the end zone and be able to score a touchdown with 0 time left on the clock. And so we've seen him perform at that level. And now you're telling me you can't pull a touchdown out when you're on the 1-yard line, right? And you get 3 chances to do it. And so I think it's a little bit disappointing. I think we are starting to see just a little bit of slippage in Aaron Rodgers' game, which he's performed at a very high level for a long time, right? Like he's still a fantastic quarterback. Like he's still much better than average. But I do think we're maybe starting to see a little bit of the end of possibly Aaron Rodgers' greatness. And that's not to say he's going to be bad and that he's fallen off and jump off the Aaron Rodgers bandwagon. Like he's still a very good quarterback, but he's just not at the level he once was, I don't think.
Yeah, from an Eagles perspective, I think it was very good to see them run the ball. I think that maybe they've gone a little bit too cute with their offense, and that's probably what's been one of the biggest detriments in their struggles, especially when it comes to their struggles with Carson Wentz.
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe Doug Peterson sees, I have an MVP level type quarterback. I should probably have him throw 30, 40 times a game rather than just, relying on Old Faithful. You went out of your way to acquire Jordan Howard. Give him some run like you did last week. You drafted Miles Sanders, give those guys the opportunity to perform, and they'll reward you half the time. And you could tell that was what really paid off in the Eagles' game plan against the Packers this week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, something that I'm worried about with the Eagles, though, is they seem to always start off at kind of a serious deficit. So I think they started off last night's game down 10, I want to say, before they scored. Same thing, I think that first game that they were playing Washington, they were down by quite a bit, and they had to come from behind. And that, to me, is just worrisome for a team, right? Like the teams that you expect to be in the playoffs and to go far and to be in Super Bowl contention, you don't like to see them always have to come from behind. Like you'd like to see them get out to a good start and a good lead and maintain that lead. And I think it always happens with like every team. I think every team at some point in the season will get off to a slow start. But to see it happen frequently with the Eagles is a little bit worrisome for me. Yeah.
Well, moving on past that game, let's start getting into this Sunday's action. So the first game we're going to be starting off with is going to be Tennessee at Atlanta. So Atlanta right now is a 3.5-point favorite according to Vegas. I'll start us off with this one. I'm going to pick Atlanta at home. Tennessee, their offense has just been so boring to watch the last few weeks. They have not had any momentum. I'm starting to wonder if that Cleveland game was a bit of a mirage, because when I watched them last week against Jacksonville, Marcus Mariota, he looks like he's going to be a backup the rest of his NFL career at this pace. And when I look at the Falcons, they've been disappointing me. I picked them to beat the Colts last week, but at home, they play completely different. We saw that against Philly in week 2. So I'm going to pick them. I'm going to pick the over.
Yeah, I'm going to take Atlanta as well. I think there's also something to say just about the level of talent that Atlanta has versus Tennessee. Tennessee, they can be good. We saw them do very well against the Browns, but I think you're right. They're sort of on like a hangover ever since that time, right? Is that they did a really good job, and maybe they're just like, oh, we did fine against the Browns, right? And in week 1, we had a great week 1, and maybe they're not playing as hard or not as motivated or something. I don't know what it is, but the Titans have not looked as good. So I'm going to take the Falcons, and I guess I'll take the under. I'll say it'll be a field goal game.
A field goal game? Yeah, that's fine. All right, well, did you think we'd be saying this in week 4? The 3-0 Patriots will be going on the road as 7-point favorites to take on the 3-0 Buffalo Bills. # Bills Mafia. Shout out to them. If they beat Tom Brady at home, how many tables do you think are going to get broken this weekend?
Oh, it's going to move beyond tables. It's going to become like TVs and anything that you can buy at a store is going to be broken. The chairs will be broken. The tables will be broken.
In any other context, anywhere on God's green earth, throwing your wife through a wooden table would not be an accepted social norm, but something's different in the water up there in Buffalo. I don't know, man. So start us off. I went with the last pick.
Okay, so start us off. I'm going to take the Patriots. I like what the Bills have been doing, right? They've been doing all right, but I don't think they've played the toughest competition right now. This is going to be like their real big test, and I think the Patriots are just going to win it, honestly. The Patriots are the better team. I think it's been a good run for the Bills. I'm happy for their fans. But to go back to the throwing your wife through the table, you get arrested anywhere else if you tell the police, yeah, I just threw my wife off my pickup truck through a table. Like, you're getting arrested. But for Bills fans, that just means you're dedicated.
Yeah, I mean, these wives are actually pretty happy to do this, which is blowing my mind. You talk about some down-ass women. The women out there in Buffalo, yeah, they can have it. They can have it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, so I moved Buffalo into my top 10 on my power rankings, which you can find on the slumpbuster.com. Shameless plug. But, yeah, I don't think they're ready to take on New England just yet. Mm-hmm. I think the Bills, it's so early in the season, and I think that they've put themselves into the playoff team contention, especially when we talk about some of the injuries to the Steelers and the underperformances of other teams like Jacksonville and Tennessee. But I think that Bill Belichick knows how to game plan for quarterbacks like a Josh Allen. Give me New England, but I'm just going to take the under on a touchdown game.
Okay. Yeah, for me, I'll take the over just because
you take the under.
Slightly different.
You think the Pats are going to beat them down?
I think they will. I'll maybe it'll be like a 10-point game. But
okay.
The other thing too is I think there is something to like the big brother syndrome when it comes to the Patriots and literally everybody else in their division, right?
Yeah, that's fair. They've been winning this division consistently for the last 20 years. So
yeah, I mean it's the same thing. Patriots, every time they play the Steelers, it's big brother syndrome, and the Steelers can never win against them. And this year we saw how bad that was. So
well, we move into another matchup of the undefeateds. This next one here. So Chiefs on the road, 7-point favorites going into Detroit. Now, I mentioned this, and actually, too, I think our podcast was way ahead of the curve on the Detroit Lions. We said they were going to be a pesky team. We said they were going to compete. And we said they were going to be a team you don't want to see on your schedule. And here they are. They should have won that game in Arizona. They should have been coming into this matchup 3-0 themselves, too. But this game might be – well, it's so hard to slow down that Chiefs offense. It's the problem. As much love as I like to give the Lions, I don't know what their game plan is for doing it. So I'm going to go with the Chiefs. I'm going to hold strong. I think the way Mahomes is playing is just on a whole different level right now. And Darius Slay, their top cornerback for the Lions, he went down last week with hamstring injury. So good luck stopping anyone of the Chiefs wide receivers with a limping Darius Slay and nothing else.
Yeah, no, I'm totally taking the Chiefs as well. I mean, the Lions, even though they're technically undefeated, right? Like they do have a tie and it was against Arizona. And so if Arizona, their offense can generate enough to be able to come back and tie it, I think the Chiefs for sure are going to put them away. And I'll take the over on this one as well.
They say over on the Chiefs. Let me say over on the Chiefs.
All right.
Okay.
There we go.
Okay.
On the record.
On the record. The next one. So we've seen some blasphemy from our fantasy football correspondent, Eris Blakeney. So he sent us his league pick'em. And in this matchup between the Chargers and the Dolphins, he did not go with conventional wisdom. He picked the Dolphins. Keep in mind, and you've heard this frequently and often, Eris himself is a Chargers fan. So it could kind of tell you where his mental state is following that loss to Houston right now. I don't think you guys are friends anymore based off what he was saying on last week's pod, too.
I know.
I don't think I'm friends with him anymore after he convinced me to take his team against Houston. But With that said, biggest line of the week, because the Chargers are 14.5 favorite on the road against the Dolphins. And the Dolphins obviously haven't given us much reason to think that they deserve anything less than that. I don't know. Did they kind of change your mind a little bit with how they were competing against the Cowboys? The Chargers are going to have to go coast to coast in this game, which is a big thing in the NFL. A lot of people take it for granted. It is a morning game. And I think, too, if I remember correctly, remember that the only win that the Cleveland Browns had a couple years ago was the Chargers. So they don't have a good record in these games. Did I go first on this last one? Yeah, you got to go with the pick here first. Lead us off, man.
I cannot choose the Dolphins over anybody, so I've got to go with the Chargers. That's a big line, though, and like you're saying, the Chargers sometimes scare me with the teams that they can lose to, right? Like there's been times where I'm like, oh, for sure the Chargers will win, and they disappoint me. But this time, I don't think that's going to happen. The Dolphins are just so bad. I've seen some high school teams that give me more excitement than the Dolphins right now. Though I will say they at least tried to compete with the Cowboys, but I'll take the Chargers. I will take the under, though, on this one.
Okay. Yeah, I love my underdogs, but I'm not even that bold right now to take the Dolphins. So, yeah, give me the Chargers. I'm going to take the under. It's just anytime I see these plus 10-point lines, it's just hard for me to go anything more than that. And what West Coast to East Coast, it's a thing. You've heard it 1,000 times before, but it's true. And yeah, we'll see it. I don't know. I think it's just kind of like that reverse mentality for Harris. Hopefully, oh God, I hope the Dolphins win though. I hope I'm wrong.
Imagine if they did.
Oh my God. If the Dolphins win, I will sign myself up for Fantasy Football podcast duty this week because I want to be on that show.
Harris, poor dude. Like we might need to watch his mental state and make sure he's doing all right if the Chargers lose.
He might call in a sick like Jalen Ramsey this week if they do that.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So we got the Redskins at the Giants as our next game. So obviously we led off the show with Daniel Jones. Case Keenum did everything he could to make this a Dwayne Haskins versus Daniel Jones game last week. 5 interceptions against the Bears. I thought that at home the Redskins would have looked a little bit better than they did. The Giants are playing with some energy right now. I think it's hard not to pick them in this matchup. I wonder if it's going to be comparable to last year when the Browns were playing the Jets and it became a point where you had a lame duck head coach and Hugh Jackson, lame duck head coach and Jay Gruden. Does he just throw out the rookie because he's just trying to save his job, throws Dwayne Haskins in at halftime if Case Keenum's not performing?
Yeah, I think so. And I think there is something to like, hey, we need to inject something new into this team. Now, it's I think they've gone through a lot of different quarterbacks, right? And so that might not necessarily work here with this team, but maybe you do. And maybe at least from a fun standpoint, right? You get the 2 rookies duking it out. And I think Dwayne Haskins has a little bit of a grudge against Daniel Jones, right? He thought he should have been the higher pick. And so I think it could be fun. As far as the pick itself, though, who do you have?
Oh, I went the Giants.
You went Giants?
Yeah. I'm going to go with Vegas's line, 3 points.
I think I'm going to do the same. I guess I'll take the slight over with the Giants. The Redskins, though, they surprised me with that week 1 against the Eagles, but ever since then, they just haven't looked as good as I had expected. I thought they would have a little bit more fight in them.
Yeah. So when it came to Baker Mayfield this week, he at least won his Twitter exchange with Rex Ryan, but will he actually be able to perform on the field is going to be the question because this Browns team hasn't really looked too good. And a lot of people are starting to really question them. So this is going to be a big game for them. And they are almost a touchdown underdog on the road against Baltimore this week. So Baltimore, too, they're coming off a tough game against Kansas City, but it was under a score game. I don't really feel like the game was ever in doubt that it was the Chiefs going to pull down that W. And we know that the Ravens' level of competition this year hasn't been the highest compared to the Browns, who have had to face Rams, the Titans, who always came out in week 1 swinging. I'm going to go with the Browns. I'm going to pick them as my underdog. I think that they need to really show something this week. The pressure is on because if they lose this week, then they're going to be 1-3. Next week, they play on Monday Night Football against, I don't know, the undefeated San Francisco 49ers. No big deal. Don't worry about it. Anyway, coming off a bye week. So they have potential, if they lose this one, to be 1-4, and not a lot of teams make the playoffs off of that. So this is such an important week. I think they play up to the moment. Give me the Browns in an upset.
All right. So to be different, I was wondering where we were going to differ on some of these things. If you didn't pick the Browns, I would have. But for the sake of being different and the fact that Baltimore, I think they've looked good all season long. Even that loss against Kansas City, there's going to be a lot of teams that lose to Kansas City. That, to me, does not drop their stock a whole lot. I'm still going to go Baltimore.
Okay, that's fair. Introducing this next game, so we talked about, again, this guy's starring off the podcast, but Kyle Allen, he's going to go on the road for a big test against the Texans. Now, I'll say this, the Texans' pass D isn't necessarily the greatest, so it might be another opportunity for him to shine, even though the Texans are the superior team. Where do you see this game going? You get first pick.
Yeah, I'm going to go the Texans. I think just a little bit more experience. I definitely respect Kyle Allen, right, after last week's game. I think there is a little bit something to what you're saying, right, that the DBs for the Texans are not the best DB core in the league, but I still have the Texans winning. The Texans are tried and true. They're really tough, and I had them as one of the best teams in the division, so I'll take the Texans.
I think that Kyle Allen has provided some energy, and it kind of goes into what I was saying last week or earlier in the podcast, how if he performs at an adequate level but still loses, what kind of decisions will go in place when it comes to the Panthers. Go ahead and give the Texans the win here as well. Home game, I just think that they're going to perform at that level they need to win this game. I don't have much faith in the Panthers because the Panthers' DBs are also pretty bad too, so it could be a bit of a shootout actually.
Yeah.
All right. Next game. The Buccaneers are going to the West Coast, so a bit of a flip-flop from where we've been with most of these matchups. They are going to be taking on the Rams. This is going to be a 9.5-point line. Give me the Rams in a blowout. I don't really have much faith in the Bucs. Even though they should have won last week, and maybe they played a little bit better than we thought they would. Like, they gave the Niners a game. They obviously beat the Panthers on Thursday night, and like I said, they should have won that game against the Giants if it wasn't for their kicker. So maybe there is something to the way Bruce Arians got Jameis Winston to play this year. But the Rams, they have the experience. They will be able to win a team that's traveling all the way across the country. Yeah, give me the Rams.
No, I'm totally going to take the Rams as well. Did you hear that? I had heard that Bruce Arians specifically wanted that delay of game call so that it would push them back, so then the kicker could make what he thought was going to be an easier field goal from farther away. I don't know how true that is. But that's what I had heard, is that they purposely took that delay of game on that last kick.
So obviously the thing about Gay, their kicker, so he was drafted pretty high in kicker terms. Mm-hmm. You think it's just the Bucs? Do you think they just poison the well when it comes to kickers? Maybe Aguayo could have worked out if he was drafted anywhere else.
Yeah, and we talked about this on the podcast. Like, we were puzzled on why you would take a kicker that high. I don't know. Maybe it's the Bucs thing. I wonder, like I said, did they ice their own kicker by, like, that delay of game? Like, if Bruce Arians really did say, hey, no, I want us to have a delay of game penalty, like, did they ice their own kicker?
But, I mean, he shanked it, so it wouldn't have really mattered in terms of if he had the distance or not.
Yeah, I don't know. I just thought
he missed an extra. He missed an extra point. In a 1-point matchup like that game was, that could have been the difference there. So, kickers.
Yeah.
I hate them in fantasy football. I hate them in real football. Just a small rant. Okay. So, obviously, I do a lot of the artwork for the website and everything like that. Making the cover art for the kicker rankings is probably the most infuriating thing I do in a given week for this podcast so far. I just want to put that on the record. I think Eris just makes the kicker rankings right now just to spite me, because he makes them 24 kickers deep, and no one cares about the 24 ranked kicker. I'm pretty sure he's going to make 32 just to spite me because he knows my rage against it.
I'm going to tell him to go to the backup kickers now. I'm going to be like, hey, you know what we really need is we need all 64 kickers. So maybe even throwing some punters in there.
I'm gonna start throwing hands if I see like anything past 12 moving forward. I'm not even gonna lie.
I can get like top 5 kickers that you would want on your fantasy team. But that's funny. I didn't know that he was doing 24 kickers deep. And the fact that he does analysis on 24 kickers amazes me.
He's that committed to the 4th down squad, as he called them in episode 2 of the podcast. I'm like, I'm done with it. I'm not putting respect on the 4th down mafia, as he called it.
Now I'm going to expect 32 kickers to be ranked every single week from now on. I'm going to text him right now.
Don't you do it. Aundre, you ignorant slut. Don't you do it. All right, back into the games.
Okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
back on track.
All right, so we got the Seahawks. They're 5.5-point favorites going on the road to face the Cardinals. This game's actually a little interesting. So I was very shocked last week that the Saints went on the road into Seattle and laid it on the Seahawks. That was the last thing I was expecting to happen in that game.
With a backup quarterback.
With the backup quarterback. And I give Teddy Bridgewater a lot of credit. I don't think he's going to carry it into this next game. We'll talk about that. But to lay that on the Seattle Seahawks, who I had as a top 10 team, you had as a top 10 team, it's going to be interesting to see how they bounce back. Do they just want to lay the beat down on the Cardinals after that game? Still on the road. Kyler Murray might bounce back a little bit. I mean, the thing about it, the Cardinals run a bit of an air raid, and the defensive backs for the Seahawks are really bad. Like, really bad. But counterbalance, the offensive line for the Cardinals is terrible, and you still have Jadeveon Clowney rushing after you. You still have Bobby Wagner up front. So it's going to be interesting to see how that matchup goes. You know what? I'm going to make this another upset pick. I'm going to pick the Cardinals at home.
Wow. Okay. No, I don't see the Cardinals beating this level of a team. I think the Cardinals might upset maybe a lower level team, but I think the Seahawks are going to win this one. I think there is something just to the sheer amount of talent that the Seahawks have compared to the Cardinals, and coaching wise, I think they're much better coached. So I'll take the Seahawks. I guess it's another one where we'll differ, but you've been hitting on these dog picks, so maybe you'll get it.
It's just at what point of hitting this do I have to start throwing money? I'll tell you at the point when my bookie comes along with that sponsorship. I got my eyes on you guys.
That's what I was thinking. I'm like, man, Juju, you need to like I think we're both above, 500, but I'm like, with some of these underdog picks, Juju, like we could be making some serious money. Maybe podcasting's not the business we need to be in right now.
We can do both. We
could, right?
All right.
And maybe more people will listen to the podcast, right? If we can tell that, hey, we've got thousands of dollars lying in the bank.
We got our Germany following. We got this, man. Shout out to the German fans. We see you. We know you listen.
Yeah, all our international fans. I think we've seen some people in like the UK, Germany.
Indonesia,
yeah. So shout out to you guys.
Next game up, Vikings at the Bears. So obviously the Bears are over 500 team, so we know Kirk Cousins is going to lose this game. Go ahead and give me the Bears. Go ahead and give me the points.
All right. This will be my upset. So I'm going to take the Vikings, and I just think they're the better team right now offensively, though the Bears defense is always very scary. I'm still taking the Vikings.
Okay, that's a fair point. I mean, I don't have much faith in Mitch Trubisky still. He played better, obviously, but I think the Redskins defense is just not good at all. So
yeah,
I think they're the perfect remedy to, like, if your quarterback's struggling. And even in a game where he was successful, we did see his coach kind of go to the sidelines and tell him off. I don't know if you saw that video trending on Twitter.
No, I didn't see that. But I had told one of my friends, so Andrew Cassier, shout out to you, but I'm going to make fun of you. He was like, oh, this is going to be the game where, the Bears offense starts to come together. And I told him, I'm like, one, I don't think Trubisky's like that great, and I don't think their offense is going to be that fantastic this year. But I was like, even if they do pop off, they're playing the Redskins, right? So you would hope that would be the one team that they can pop off against. And so I think that's exactly what it was. Sort of like you were saying, their defense is not that great. So you can have an average quarterback still look great.
Are we going to have to give a Mitch Trubisky apology? Are we going to have to start that episode one day?
So,
Probably not.
I don't know. I mean, I think he had a great year last year, but we had even called it. We had said that, hey, he's likely going to regress a little bit this year. We were wrong about Lamar Jackson a little bit, at least, right? Year's not done, but it seems like we're wrong about Lamar Jackson.
I mean, we'll analyze kind of our preseason picks here in a couple of weeks and kind of like see how we're doing. I can already tell you I was wrong on Baltimore. I was wrong on the Packers.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll eat those L's. Anytime you enter the public sphere, you have to accept you're going to make some wrong opinions, and I've released a few. You've released a few, so it is what it is. You take
exactly.
Anyway, next game up, Jaguars at the Broncos. So Minshew Mania sweeping the nation, but will it travel to the Rockies? No. I'm sorry to jump you on this one too, but I think I'm going to go with the Broncos just because I like what Gardner Minshew's been doing, and I do think that it is a bit of statistical anomaly right now that the Denver Broncos don't have any sacks despite having Von Miller, despite having Bradley Chubb. I think this is the week where they finally crack the lid open on those two. Especially, I don't have much faith in the O-line of the Jaguars. Minshew Mania has been a nice little headline, but Denver's kind of one of the better home environments in the NFL, so I don't think that the Jaguars can keep up over there. So, yeah, give me the Broncos, and I'll stick with the Vegas line, 3 points.
All right, so this is where we're going to differ again. This is going to be another one of my upset picks. I'm going Minshew. Uncle Rico's going to throw that ball over the mountains, bro.
Over the Rockies?
Over the Rockies. He's going to throw the ball over the Rockies. I'm taking the Jaguars.
I wonder – I just have this image in my head of Gardner Minshew enjoying some Coors Light after the game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It seems like right up his alley, that beverage. I mean, I would say Pabst Blue Ribbon, but hey, he's traveling to Denver, so he might as well indulge.
Yeah, upgrade a little bit.
No, I'm not going to sidebar this anymore. I'll bring up someone in recent weeks of Minshew Mania continues. Stay tuned for a fun story. Anyway, Cowboys at the Saints. All right. So Cowboys at the Saints. Like I said, the Saints, they surprised me last week. Teddy Bridgewater came out firing. They really came in that game motivated to prove that Drew Brees wasn't going to derail their entire season. Cowboys 3-0, looking like I have them right now as my third-ranked team in the league. I'll let you go on this one. You can pick the primetime games to start off just because I've went the last two.
Yeah, I'm going with the Cowboys. They just look really good right now. I give all my Cowboys friends crap just because I hate Cowboys fans, and I think they can be annoying. I do think that they had an easy stretch of their season, right? So we had even said this, right? If Zeke held out, these would, be the bad 3 games for him to hold out against, just because I thought the Cowboys would win those games no matter what. The Saints, I think it does get a little bit more difficult. Obviously, it would be more difficult if Drew Brees was playing. Teddy Bridgewater did a great job. We know he's an NFL-level quarterback, but I still don't see him being able to pull out the win. So give me the Cowboys. And, I mean, you can't, outside of a 2-point game, right, there's not a whole lot of room for under. So I'm going to say give me a 3-point game. It'll be like a field goal.
Okay, so bet over on that one.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go with the Cowboys too. I get it. The Saints in the Superdome do have a home field advantage, unlike a lot of other teams, but the Cowboys still do have a pretty good defense there, and I just don't think that Teddy Bridgewater can really keep up. He's going to be good in the long run, developing more under the Sean Payton system. But I think a big primetime game like this lines up pretty well for the Cowboys. Give me the Cowboys. I'm actually going to go under, though. I think there is a potential for this to be a 1-point game. I'll give it to those guys in Vegas. They know what they're doing. Next game up, the matchup of 0-3 teams.
I know, and it hurts. It hurts looking at this.
I'm sure it does. I think it's going to hurt a lot of people's eyes to see Andy Dalton in a primetime game in general, because typically it does. But Bengals are going on the road to face the Steelers. This used to have a lot of steam of being a primetime rivalry game in years past. We have seen some good games between these two franchises recently. But the other side of that argument is we've seen those games with Ben Roethlisberger under quarterback, and that's going to be one of the big things. So last week, my Niners gave the Steelers every chance to win that game. Six turnovers in the first half, or 4 turnovers in the first half, 6 overall. And Mason Rudolph couldn't move the ball. He plays a bit of a weaker defense this week against the Cincinnati Bengals. Can he win at home? Can he bounce back? Or is Andy Dalton going to get the edge just because he is actually an NFL starting quarterback?
Yeah, so I think Mason Rudolph's going to bounce back. I've got to take my team, especially at home, especially against the Bengals. What I will say, do you know what really went wrong with last week's game for the Steelers?
Tell me about it.
I checked the score. So I kid you not, every time that I don't check the score, right, like my team is winning and everything goes fine, and I'm like, hey, I'm going to check the score, right, and look on my phone and try to watch some plays or whatever, or I'll look on TV right at a sports bar, and my team loses every single time. So we'll be winning, and then we lose as soon as Aundre starts watching the game or checking the score. And so from now on, I'm just not going to watch Steelers games or check the score, and I think we're going to win. So the rest of the season, I'll be cheering for the Steelers, but after they finish their games is when I'll look.
cheering from afar. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of these teams has to go 0-4, and I just don't see it historically being the Steelers. They just aren't that kind of franchise, and it is a home game. I think go ahead and give me the Steelers. They're a better coached team at this point as well. I think Mike Tomlin's going to be a bit of the difference maker. I do think Zach Taylor has really impressed me, though, in terms of his play calling for the Bengals. And Andy Dalton's actually second in the league in passing yards. So they have – I mentioned this, the Bengals were going to be a bit of a glass cannon team this year in the sense that they can score offensively. They do have some weapons around them, and the new offense was going to be good for them. But they still lack a few defensive pieces. So I don't think they're going to be able to contain the most motivated team in the league right now in the Steelers. So go ahead and give me the Steelers, and I'll go the under on this 3.5-point line. It's going to be a field goal game. It's going to be an ugly Monday night game.
Yep, I totally agree on that. I've got the Steelers by 3. What I do think is interesting, though, if the Steelers do fall to 0-4, right, how hot of a seat is Mike Tomlin on? Because historically, the Steelers organization doesn't fire coaches, right? Like, we leave them there till they retire. But, I mean, you go from, the playoffs to last year didn't make the playoffs, and then this year, you're one of the worst teams in the league if you go down 0-4, which I think from a talent standpoint, like, you can argue, well, Big Ben got hurt, right? And we lost one of our best receivers and best running back. But in the NFL, like, we see it, like, it's obvious you have to still get the wins. You can't make excuses.
You say that, but I do think that having your starting quarterback go down does give you a little bit more leeway. When Kyle Shanahan lost Jimmy Garoppolo, everyone pretty much throws out last season because he didn't have a starter. I loved seeing what Nick Mullins and C.J. Beathard were able to do, but not having your starting quarterback buys you a little bit of room to operate if you're an NFL coach. And I'd like to think that Mike Tomlin's built up enough equity in that organization to be able to withstand a season where he lost Big Ben to a Tommy John injury.
Yeah.
I guess we'll see. I think that Tomlin's going to at least have one more year unless the Steelers just look really bad. Like, if they're not even competing in games or they're losing games that they probably should win, then we're going to have to talk about that discussion moving forward. All right. I think that will do it for us, Trey.
Hold on. We got one game that we actually skipped.
Which game did we skip?
Raiders-Colts.
Oh, well.
Not that it's a big game, but
not that it's a big game. Okay, my bad to Raider Nation right now. I guess
they're going to be very upset in Oakland and Vegas.
Yeah, diverse fan base. Like, they have no home in the NFL, and they have no home on this podcast, apparently. Sorry, Raider Nation. All right, I guess let's talk about this game a little bit. So the Raiders are going to not have another home game till November. That is pretty sad. So I think that kind of like says that this season's just a complete wash for them. The Colts have really come out a lot better than I ever projected them coming in off of the Andrew Luck retirement, regardless of the talent they did have on that roster that we're seeing now. Obviously, I'm taking the Colts. I just don't think that the Raiders will have the stamina to go on the road for the first of 5 straight weeks, which I even believe includes a London game in there. So not looking good.
Yeah, no, that's rough to be traveling that much. And I think just from a mental standpoint too, right? So not only are you physically tired going across the different coasts or to different countries, but mentally you're exhausted. You're away from your family. You're in foreign cities that you're not used to for that many weekends in a row. Can be really tough. So I agree. I'm going to take the Colts though. The Colts have impressed me, even though Andrew Luck has obviously retired. We did say it. We did say that they're still a very talented team, right? Even without Luck. And so I think the Colts are going to win this one. Though I only have them by 3, so I'll take the under.
Okay. All right. Well, that's going to do it for this week's episode, or at least on the article. So tell me, Dre, anything you're doing after this pod?
Yeah. So I'm planning to go to this Japanese film. It's called One Cut of the Dead. And so it's a zombie movie where it's all filmed in one sequential shot. So there's nothing like you're not piecing together different scenes or anything like that. So it's supposed to be really cool. It's at this theater called the Guild Cinema here in Albuquerque. They get a lot of eclectic type films, stuff that you'd only see at like an international film festival and all that. So I'm pretty excited for it. What about you?
I'm just going to go celebrate that Marvel and Sony finally reached a deal. Yes.
Oh,
more Spider-Man.
So, yeah, Spider-Man's back in the MCU then, right?
Yes. Thankfully, we mentioned it on this pod before, would have been one of the most horrible decisions that Sony has made, and they've made a lot, in particular in terms of killing Spider-Man franchises. Thankfully, we don't have to have another Spider-Man reboot. Uncle Ben doesn't have to get shot one more time, and we can finally move on with Tom Holland as Spider-Man.
Yeah. No, it's the right decision to make. I think everybody wants to see Spider-Man at least have some role in the MCU, right? And so it works out for both Disney and Sony. Sony gets the boost from having Spider-Man associated with the Avengers, and Disney gets the boost from having Marvel's biggest superhero, arguably.
Yeah, we reached another milestone this week, Dre, though. We went an entire episode without mentioning Antonio. Thanks once again, our listeners, for tuning in. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at Slumpbuster Podcast, on Twitter at Slumpbuster Pod. Check out the website, theslumpbuster.com, for power rankings, weekly fantasy football updates, and articles from around the sporting world. Other than that, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.